Nagas. It's distracting.
Hello and welcome to the Mobile Accessible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Mobile Accessible Games is a group that's focused on all things mobile accessible gaming, and through our interview series, we interview game developers, accessibility influencers, and accessibility advocates around the state of mobile accessible gaming. This week, we are doing something a little bit different. We have a game developer. His name is David Evans. He is the creator of the game The Vale, Shadow of the Crown, which is found on the Xbox console. And I really wanted to speak with David because usually we find that console gamings are very difficult for the blind community to engage with, but his game, The Vale, has really been designed and focused and around meeting the needs of the blind community. It's an exceptional game, and I really wanted to talk to him about it and also expose the blind community to this exceptional game on a different platform than we normally play our games. So David, welcome to the interview series.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
So David, I always like to just start the interview by having the person I'm interviewing just give a short little bio, a few sentence, paragraph about yourself, who you are, so we can get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, my name's Dave Evans. I started in the entertainment industry in general as a film director, writer, doing small short films and stuff up in Canada. And I got a job as a cinematographer in games. That was my introduction to games, making cinemas and AAA games. And then I slowly moved over into indie game development as I really wanted to move more of the narrative that we were presenting in games out of cinematics that were separate from gameplay and more into the game flow itself. And that brought me to The Vale, where I really wanted a inexpensive way of trying out some stuff with narrative. And I thought making an all audio game would be a good start to doing that sort of by myself. At least I started by myself and then brought a very large group of people on with me.
So that's fascinating. I mean, your background seems more on the visual, with the cinematography of gaming and things like that to kind of switch and introduce a game with a Vale, which we'll hear more about. But I mean, it does not have any visuals or very minimal visuals. It's more of an auditory narrative experience. I mean, that's a pretty big shift, I would imagine, from what you had experienced in the past.
Yeah, I guess the carryover was when I worked in cinemas, we did separate performance. The voice performance was separate from the motion capture performance. So I spent a lot of time taking the story we had written and working with voice actors. So I felt very comfortable doing that, and I felt I could hit a pretty high bar with just the quality of the performances and the narrative through the actors. So that was still the core of what I liked the most about game development. So I carried that and just had to learn how to, do sound design on the spot. Well, I had 5 years to figure it out anyway.
Yeah, well, that's also interesting. I mean, it sounds like you had a sliver of the gaming that you did and kind of the visuals and the things that you were just talking about. Now you move into doing the Vale, where it sounds like you're responsible for just about everything. So, I mean, did you have to learn coding, or did you bring people in who, this is my grand idea, go code it for me? How did you kind of handle that aspect?
Yeah, no, I do not know how to program at all. I needed partners from the very beginning. So that was the first person I brought on was a programmer, sort of a junior programmer to help me build the prototype. And then eventually I got my friends involved, in which, people who I'd worked with in the past. I brought them onto the project, people who are more senior in production, to help me basically finish the game.
So this particular game, let's start a little bit, The Vale, Shadow of the Crown. Again, why don't you, in a few sentences, tell people what that game is, and then I'll have some follow-up questions about it.
Yeah, sure. The Vale, it's an audio-based game. And it's really trying to pick up, if anyone's familiar with a Blind Legend or other games. I know they're on mobile as well, but a game that has a relatively straightforward combat system where you hear things around you and you swing out and you time attacks. It's got that at its core. And then it expands on that with a little bit more exploration, adventuring, basically walking through a 3D soundscape to collect your quests, to find secrets. And it's set in a medieval, noisy, armor-clad medieval world, which works really well, I think, for audio games. And it's heavily narrative driven, probably more focused on narrative than I think most of the games I can think of that have the mechanic you might be familiar with, in a Blind Legend. But hopefully we expanded on that. I think it goes well beyond that. I'd like to think, but that was the core of the starting point for the game.
Now, narratively, the story that you're telling, again, you have a blind princess named Alex who has been kind of shuttled away from the main lands. Her brother's taken over the kingdom. She's sent out to a remote fortress to kind of lead there.
Mhm.
And then things go awry, and she kind of needs to kind of rescue the day, if you will. But how did you come up with that story? Like, where did that story come from as the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, I think which a typical I did a typical thing of a sighted developer who was making an audio game. I I I latched onto the novelty of playing a blind character, which I very quickly learned in working with the blind community that I just walked into a trope pretty quickly. But I felt like I had built enough of the plot and the experience around this novelty for sighted players that I still thought it had legs. And I think that was the first real challenge, when it came to making a game both that's novel for the sighted community, but also has is what's the word? I guess is acceptable to the blind community, in trying to handle Alex, and her experience. So people who played it from the sighted community, many of them are, I've never played anything like this before. This is so novel, and doing all the things that I discovered as being interesting. And then heeding the warnings from the community I was making this game with, essentially, which is the blind community. I also had to make sure that Alex was a complex character who was not defined by her disability, and all the things that I think are just good writing. I don't think these were things I had to learn, but at the same time, they're things I'd be very cognizant of, and had a lot of help along the way in making this character. I mean, really, the whole point of the novelty is it really should wear off within a few minutes of playing the game, of being Alex, and then you forget about the disability. It's just the way you navigate the world, and then she's identified. She's basically it's about her journey to becoming a leader, and
Right.
giving her and her self confidence building, that sort of thing. Very quickly, I at least forget that's the way the end to the lack of visuals is this disability, but it really isn't the way I think about her within about an hour maybe of playing the game.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so much. We're going to hit a lot of stuff about this storyline. So, I mean, I understand, particularly from a game design, when you're having no visuals, it's very easy to be like, well, I have to explain why there's no visual. So you have
Mm-hmm.
a blind legend, you have a blind drive, you have To
Mm-hmm.
the Dragon Cave. These are all games that put a blind person or a person who's blinded, um, as the main character, and this explains why the mechanics are the way the mechanics are. So I kind of totally understand why that happens. But I guess my follow-up question there is, now that you've done that and kind of designed a game, and that was the mechanic, to kind of explain it, do you see a path where you can create a game like um, Vale Shadow of the Crown, where the main character isn't blind, and you can explain the game mechanics by not having a blind protagonist as the reason for this particular game mechanic? Have you envisioned a path to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I can just say that this game is an audio game, and
Okay.
it doesn't need to have that contextual immersion of why are there no visuals. And that was something I could have done with the Veil. Like, I really could have changed course. I just kind of fell in love with the story and the character, and for better or for worse, the novelty of the experience, which did have an interesting feedback. Like, the community feedback I got in keeping the character blind was, at the end of the day, people who had reservations, most of them came, well, nobody said anything negative, but the people came back and said, I think we did a good job. I think we handled that well. We being them as well, because they were involved in the creation of the game. And there was a lot of people in the blind community who had not played video games before, didn't think games were for them. And a few of them immediately on playing it, not having been aware of the trope themselves, were quite appreciative of having representation and
Sure.
good representation, at least from their perspective, which is something I had to kind of figure out. It's like, okay, there's representation. I hired blind actors to play some of the roles too. So there was a lot of aspects of that I think were beneficial. But yeah, I don't think I could go back, to be honest. I really think my thought is I would I would have there's no reason, especially with the story world that we created, to go back to this world and have blind characters be part of the world. But I think from a wish fulfillment or from a RPG standpoint, I really think that my next game, first of all, will have visuals, I think, which will get rid of
Bigger
that whole,
budget.
yeah, bigger budget.
Yeah.
But I think you're going to choose your character, and I think you will be able to choose a character that is blind as part of the of the RPG aspects of the game. And I don't, that won't change the visual representation or the sound representation. The point is that it'll be accessible. So you could play as a sighted character, and your character would talk as if they can see things, and you would be able to control that character and embody that character, even though you're blind. But you could also play as a sighted person playing a blind character. I don't think I'd take the visuals away in that case, though. But I think there would be certain aspects of the game that would allow you to rely more on audio, with the goal also of not alienating the deaf community, which was something that my game did.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that is special about this narrative is you have Princess Alex, and she is not a victim. You know, as you said, she's not defined necessarily by her disability. She is the one who is, quick to rush to help other people, while those who are fully able are trying to run away and running scared.
Yeah.
She has her uncle, who, in a series of flashbacks, is believing in her. You can do anything. I'm going to teach you,
Yep.
How to live in this world, and not have you be, meek and small. You're going to be strong and confident. And he kind of teaches her all the skill sets that she needs to, become the leader that she becomes. And it doesn't cast her off as less than. And I think that was kind of a real special part of the narrative, was not defining the person by their disability, not limiting them by their disability, but those are some of the strongest characters. Alex is a strong character. The old crone woman is a strong character. These are the people who are really the heroes and really taking lead and taking charge, while those other more able people, quote, able people, are following them and realizing their strength and their leadership and their abilities. And I thought that was really special. And for you as a person who is sighted, how did you get kind of the insight of this is the way I should portray them? Because it's just natural. Like I went blind 4 years ago. I don't think I paid necessarily much attention to the daily struggles and the daily slice is not quite the right word, but perceptions of people with disabilities of what they can and can't do. I don't know if I would have the tool set to write this type of narrative until after I went blind. So as a sighted person, how did you have that kind of insight to write this kind of depth of a character with these strengths that usually people don't see in the blind community?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a writer, there's a certain amount of empathy or embodying a character that you do not have the exact experience with. I think it's a natural place to start. But I also had very quickly I ended up I went to the CNIB in Canada, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, and said, "Hey, is this game interesting to anybody here?" And there was, and I very early on I had people helping me work on the game, and not from an accessibility standpoint necessarily either. This was going to be an all audio game that happened to be accessible. And I really just went to the group that had the most experience playing and making these games, is sort of where I started. So in a very weird way, I was working with the blind community to make a game that's novel for the sighted community and is also accessible. And that group naturally would have all sorts of things to say about the narrative. So I had a lot of consultation a lot of people just freely helping me write the game itself. And about 200 people focus tested the game, and not the focus
Oh,
testing I'm kind of used to. Focus testing sometimes very, hit and miss, passive. Someone comes in and trolls something in the game.
right.
But I had like 200 act people who wrote giant amounts of comments and thoughts and had discussions and arguments online about how certain elements should be portrayed. So it I felt so supported in getting that right, because I felt there was just so much engagement and conversation about how to handle certain things. So I just felt like I was supported, and as the game went out, I think we did okay. Like I really do think we got it, but it was only through that, I think, that happened.
Now, the Vale has gotten some great attention and received some awards for its gameplay, its narrative. So why don't you just inform people some of the awards that this game has won.
Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, there's a lot of innovation awards for the use of audio mechanics that have come through various shows around North America. Probably the biggest one, we were nominated for best accessibility. What was it? Best innovation accessibility for the Game Awards. I got to go to LA and watch Sting on
Nice,
stage. It was
nice.
kind of cool. And we didn't win. I think it Forza, I think, got us. And yeah, we won a Canadian Screen Award, which is really cool for narrative. Which is like our Oscars. It's a combination of art, film, and television awards, and it was kind of neat to get recognition in a field that I'd started this all in, which was film and television. I ended up winning an award for narrative. But yeah, no, it's been a great ride, well appreciated. A lot of accessibility related awards, I think, kind of obviously, and some audio awards too, obviously, in a way.
I mean, now sitting, the game's out, lots of people have played it. Do you have a sense of, maybe the impact the game has had on first, the sighted community, on, the capabilities, abilities of, the blind community, and, the impact on the blind community around, maybe I should have more confidence, that I can do things, look at this hero, and that's someone I can look up to. So, any sense of the impact that the game has had on maybe those two different groups?
Yeah, anecdotally, I know that there were quite a few people who this was their first game experience. I don't know enough about how communities rally around, just sort of in general, how communities rally around things that they become aware of. But the Vale was fairly well known within the community, from what I could tell, and there was a lot of people who found it or came to it. And kind of ironically, it wasn't on a phone, a mobile device, but one of the more comfortable pieces of technology that people are very familiar with in the blind community. But at least the people I spoke to that showed up at the CNIB, these are people that are going to the CNIB for all sorts of reasons. They're not necessarily there to check out a video game. They just happen to be there. And it did open up a world for them, from a idea that, oh, maybe games are for me. And by the way, I think circumstantially that could have happened with any of the games that are out there right now, but I think it was a really nice introduction because the game was very much made for people of different levels of experience with games. People who play Swamp, all the way to people who play who haven't played games before. And then from what was the other idea in this is that people are certainly from the sighted community. I found this so weird, but people were not aware that any of these games even existed, and I would get comments about how innovative this is as an idea. I can't believe people haven't done it, and I'd be, well, people have done this before.
Right.
So it was an introduction to a genre, and a genre that kind of is lining up with the popularity of podcasting and audio media. So I'd like to think that's something that's starting, certainly indie development within it, and hopefully Last of Us Part 2 won't be alone in
Right.
really pushing boundaries and getting into AAA. I mean, we're on the console, but we're not a big AAA game. But that, to me, I think that's the most exciting idea, is that every big game that comes out would be accessible, and then more indies would do these things too. So hopefully that's starting something.
Yeah, I mean, so for those people, again, most of the people who follow me, we're around mobile accessible gaming, as I told you, and so people are used to playing games on their phone. This is a console game, on the Xbox and on the PC as well, if I remember. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
So let's just talk about the Xbox for a second. So if you had to kind of explain to people who maybe never sat down with an Xbox controller, kind of explain the two joystick movement and how that plays into moving around this game, how it plays into blocking or attacking in this game, to give them just kind of a sense of it's a really kind of simple and yet ingenious design to make it very intuitive to play this game. And so I kind of want you to give people the kind of that summary, so they can maybe realize it's maybe not as intimidating as they think it might be.
Yeah, and that actually, by the way, that was one of the things, probably the first misstep I made was assuming I had to simplify things a lot more than I ended up simplifying them. So the game right now has pretty much straightforward first-person controls, where the left stick controls your movement, walking forward, backward, side to side, and the right stick controls where you're looking, without any up and down looking. So everything is on a flat plane. So all the enemies, all the things that you can interact with are all straight in front of you, wherever you're moving. I originally had much more simple controls where you just turned back and forth and move straight forward, and there was no sliding side to side, because I was worried that people would become disoriented. And very quickly within the blind community, there were people obviously who played with controllers before, played first person games before, and thought, why are you doing this to us, Dave? This is awful. Like these limitations. And then just in me playing it, I realized, oh no, there is intuitive feel to this setup, and it generally works, and people who don't know it will figure it out. And that's the other thing I realized too, is but within the blind community, people seem to be able to really would push much further to learning how to do things with technology, and are used to being held up by something that might be frustrating or something, and pushing through. And I was doing a little too much hand holding on that too, where I felt it would be frustrating for me. It must be frustrating for other people. But eventually, I think we got it down to a point where, it is intuitive. We removed all the things that don't matter, the up and down, looking up and down. And the other thing that was on my plate very early was my first consultant, who worked from the beginning to the end of the game. I just brought on others. He had said, please put this on a controller. Please have haptic feedback, do all those things. I know people within my community aren't super familiar with the controllers, but I want them to be. I want them to be playing on these platforms. I want them to be using controllers, because then people will do things for us.
Right,
they'll change things because we're using this thing. They can't just say, oh, you don't use that.
Right.
So that was a real big thing from his perspective, is he really thought I should do all the things I possibly could, even if they weren't familiar, because he wanted to move people onto these things, onto consoles. And that was an assumption I had. It's like, who from the blind community is playing games on consoles?
Right.
And then I realized they were more accessible than I thought, with the narration and stuff you could turn on. And then I started realizing, well, why not? I mean, once there's more content, I mean, this is a place you can be. And that was something very important to him in particular.
Yes, absolutely. I wonder too, and I think you hit on it a little bit, but you might sit there as a sight person and be like, oh, it's so hard to figure out where the sound is coming from and what I'm supposed to do.
I know.
But when you put that in front of the blind community, were they at first just like, breezing through the game and finding it too easy? Like, did you have to ramp up the difficulty, understanding that they're gonna be able to understand it and get it, and are more accustomed to understanding and paying attention to where sounds are coming from, and distinguishing what's coming from my right versus what's coming from my left?
Yeah, there's a few factors there. The first one is binaural audio. People don't hear it the same way, so it doesn't matter if you're sighted or blind. Some people can hear binaural audio better in the average setup. So you have to do quite a bit of technical work to get everything to work for an individual. So things had to be relatively easy, because I don't know how well people hear binaural audio. So that was the first challenge across the board. But in terms of difficulty, it really had to do with the blind focus testers tended to listen to instructions really well, and sighted focus testers did not. So if I told you this is how you move, turn right, turn left, people in the blind community go, yep, I heard you. I actually listened, and now I'm going to go and do this thing. And people on the side, so many would just be like, like because they're used to just figuring stuff out. So and or another prompt will come up and protect them or help them. Well, I can't just be spamming audio the
Right.
whole time. So they would be like, what did he say? Like they just weren't paying attention. So I had to do a lot more hand holding for the sighted community for tutorials. And then the last aspect, I guess, is the idea of spatialized sound and navigation. It did people within the blind community did pick it up a lot quicker, either familiarity with other games or just general. This is what you do day to day on some level in terms of finding things, I guess. And I think the big thing with what is it the not the navigation, but that difficulty setting combat was another threshold. That was driven mostly by hardcore gamers within the blind community that play Swamp and just were looking for a game that had more challenge.
Yeah.
So the difficulty settings are set to Swamp mode. Someone who really wants to be beaten up in combat. I don't know if I ever got it hard enough for them, to be honest. I couldn't beat sections of it, and then people who could just basically want to play the story.
I mean, what is great about the combat is it's a lot of times you for the blind community it's like face this one enemy, beat that one enemy, now move on to next enemy. This is you have multiple people attacking virtually at the same time, and it is a
Mhm.
pretty frantic block here, attack there. It's engaged. You get anxious about this battle that you're fighting as opposed to it is just real cookie cutter and one at a time. It's
Yeah.
a pretty great combat system for those who are really interested in having that type of experience. You were talking as well about navigating through the sound, and maybe you could kind of explain to people a little bit of, all right, I'm in a village.
Mhm.
You can hear the bell, tower, it's, straight ahead of you. You can hear, a person calling out his wares to the right of you. You hear, festival or something to your left. But like, game design wise, or actually, how do you do that? Is it kind of like a virtual map and you kind of tag, here's where these things are, and now I'm moving, and it kind of gauges where I am, relative now to the church versus the person calling out the wares versus the festival. Like, how do you actually game mechanic coding wise design that? I guess.
Yeah. First of all, you described my game way better than I do. You always jump right to the more you talked about the narrative right away, way better than I did. And yeah, there's this really important idea of navigation. Um, yeah, I mean, the first thing that there were some rules that we sort of stuck to, design rules. First of all, we used an editor, a game editor called Unity, and I physically put down like I could see the village. I could look at the village, top down view. I could move things around. So everything has a real world ratio perspective. Like characters, a meter and a half tall. Items are set at the height levels and all this stuff. And then the binaural audio does all the work. It's very specifically, you're able to hear these things in space because I placed them there.
Right. So
The
you're working
rule,
on like a virtual map of
yep,
actually saying church is here, sound of a church, tagged to that location. And
yes, exactly. It have a name. I mean, I didn't have to do it like it's a sound. So the church is just a little box sitting on the other side of a wall that you can't go into. And the cellar is a box and people moving around or dogs or whatever it is that's moving around. There are little boxes floating around with different colors. Like it looks ridiculous, but I can tell what's there and I can move things and I don't have to think about mathematically where to place this from an audio perspective. I literally put it in the place I want it to be and then it's there. And try to keep the sound ratios, like mix them to be a certain noisiness and actually put them far away, because then there's all sorts of things that affect the sound that were baked into this plugin, the audio plugin. So, the amount of reverb or how much was it atmospheric absorption, all this stuff that's being run under the hood. I just put things where they were supposed to be in real life, and then it kind of worked out. So that was really important. We got the tech right on that. And then we had a few rules. One was I didn't want this to be a maze game. So all the explorable spaces are open. So you don't ever put a silent wall in between you and a sound. At least I
right,
tried not to.
right.
Maybe there's a couple spots where people are banging against something. Anything that is in your way that's a hazard or an obstacle makes sound. So I could put a fire pit I want, or like I think I had these gaping holes of wind rushing through that you could fall through and die. So hazards and stuff would all make sound. And then everything was an open courtyard, which wasn't far off the medieval
Sure, style.
architecture of an interesting space. Like
Right.
who wants to walk around the back alleys? You want to be in the bustling sort of space. And I think the important thing about that experience, not only did I not want to make a maze game, but I wanted it to be immersive. The other rule was that that you're supposed to find easily. If Alex can find it easily, the player should find it easily. So beacons like the cellar that you have to go talk to, or the church bells, or whatever you're trying to find, those are not and are all hard to hear or find. You can hear them from anywhere in the space.
Right.
But things that are kind of secrets that kind of reward exploration, those can be more localized, like the sound of a dog barking
Right.
and begging for food that you could feed or something.
Right.
Those are the rewards, right? And that was it was important for me to have Alex. Really part of for the experience of a sighted person is there is something kind of empowering or special about just playing Alex walking through a busy market. I mean, there's no way I would do that. Walk around,
Right.
not be able to see through a busy space, but Alex does it with confidence, and
Right.
it's part of, I think, the experience that somebody who's blind would identify with, I would hope, and somebody who's sighted would go, oh, I actually feel okay about this, and it's an experience. It's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I found it pretty special. Like when you're in, a village and you're hearing all those sounds and the bells and the people calling out their wares and the dog barking and this festival, off in the distance. There was such rich sound. It really kind of filled the space. You really felt directional.
Mhm.
I can't imagine. I don't even know if you have the answer to this, but like at one time, like when you're in that village, I mean, how many soundtracks are playing at the same time? To kind of create that world. I mean, then you also have the actors,
Mhm.
Alex and her Shepherd, and the other people who are kind of talking as you're walking through the space. I mean, to pull that all together and not have it just sound like a cacophony of noise. I can see why you guys won awards around audio design and audio structure because it really just feels natural and alive. Um, so, I mean, do you have any sense of how many different tracks it takes, when you were in that kind of village?
Yeah, actually, one of the tricks is also keeping it relatively clean and focused so that it doesn't sound like a cacophony. So the basic idea is there's um, a placed binaural audio ambient track that actually is mixed in binaural. So when you spin around, this track that's been made by somebody who I bought this package from, the Boom Audio people, made this thing where I spin around. It sounds like the din of a medieval village. You can hear all the little things that are moving around in space. And that's like that. That's sort of if I just put that in one track, you would already feel a little bit like you're in this space.
Right.
And then I placed another 10 to 20 sounds that were localized to locations that filled in the track, but also were things you could actually go and see and interact with.
Interact with it.
So really those were as many as I needed for interactions, which are probably average maybe 10 were specific sounds. There's really only like maybe 11 sounds, but that backing track really kind of filled the rest.
I mean, even 11 sounds, that's a lot of sounds to hear at
I
one
guess,
time.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
And again, I think probably the blind community is a little bit more used to that and trying to,
Mhm.
filter out the sounds they don't want to hear and focus on the sounds they want to hear. I imagine that was maybe a unique experience for some of the sighted people to get used to.
Yeah, we did a directional mix too. So if it sounds behind you, it's mixed way down too. So it does limit. You're only listening really intently
Right.
to the sounds that are in front of you. So
Right.
that helps as well.
There was, again, around, I guess, I call this narrative structure or design. There was a part of the game, I think it happened a couple different times, but I found it really special that you thought of this. So I think Alex and her companion Shepherd, come across a village. They're looking down on a village. They've just arrived, come out of the woods, and he's like, "Oh, we're at a village." And you can hear the village in the background, and she says,
Describe it for me.
It's a steep climb down to the ferry dock, but the river will be our best hope of getting ahead of the horde.
No, describe the view.
The view? I suppose it's nice.
Go on.
The sun is setting. Beyond the town. The sky is red.
I can't picture colors.
The sky is like fire. It warms the clouds piled up like wool on the horizon.
Yes.
However, the light on the river has turned it into a writhing serpent, burning its way through the forest. That is our path.
Thank you, Shepherd.
and he takes the time to explain it to her, to allow that kind of visual, kind of context of what it is that you're facing and looking at. And it's the part of my own kind of own personal journey. It's the problem I had with Last of Us Part Two, which is great game that did a lot of things that are accessible in that, but while playing the game, I wasn't feeling connected to what am I actually engaging with.
Mhm.
It's just a bunch of sounds, and I'm not. Am I in a building? Am I in a village? Am I in a city? Like I don't quite know exactly what I'm engaging with, and you kind of
Mhm.
just naturally in the narrative, made it seamless to kind of provide that context. And I thought that was kind of a really special thing. Which I don't know if you got feedback, from the beta testers who kind of said, you need to kind of give us some context here. Put in a line or two, or did you just kind of naturally come up with that on your own?
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, I had an idea that I wouldn't have voiceover narration driving this. Aside from text things that you'd normally see, like push the right stick to move here, that sort of stuff. That's the only narration that comes in. So I thought, oh, I want to paint a picture for people through the audio landscape. So either it would be so self-evident where you are and what you're hearing because of the specifics of the sound design, like, oh, I'm clearly in a village. I don't need to know what the village looks like. I can hear this village. So that was number one. And then there's these other moments. By the way, this was a well discussed section of our game within the focus testing community, because there was some questions of whether or not that Alex would have this engagement with Shepard and asking something to be described for her. It was this thing that I mean, from an empowerment standpoint, it felt like maybe this was not something Alex would do, or a lot of people didn't have the same experience. They weren't asking friends to describe things for them. This was a discussion that came up, and there was these two sides that sort of formed on it, with whether or not they felt this was a good thing to have in the game. Like, it did get discussed, and basically, I just basically tailored this in a way that I felt it was also a narrative connector, a character connector. It was a way of connecting Shepard with Alex, that he's doing this thing that's thoughtful enough in the way he tries to describe things, and then is coached on it because she's blind since birth, so she doesn't have a
Right.
concept of colors and certain things that she doesn't. These are all real experiences that I drew from the community. So it's a little bit coaching someone who's sighted, as the Shepherd is coached when he tries to describe things. It's a sort of a callback where she says, describe something for me, and then he says something, and then in a situation where something's terribly violent or disturbing, he says, I don't think I want to describe this for you. Like, there's a sort of a callback aspect to it, and it's part of this. It's the emotional connection key from a narrative hook, sort of a narrative tool as well. So it does all these things, but I got a ton of coaching on this because it was something that came up a lot as to, would this be something that would Alex would do this? Would this be something that somebody who's blind do with this person they didn't know and stuff? So it was definitely well thought out in the execution. And then, sorry, one last thing is, when it comes to the actual description, I hope it does add a little bit of flavor to that. In another game, I might use audio description. Like, I just for this one, I wanted everything to be in world.
Right. No, I like that in world aspect of it, and again, I think it's probably the debate comes a lot around the spectrum of blindness, right? Blindness is not I see nothing, and I always saw nothing. It might be I lost my sight in my 40s. Spent a life of seeing. I'm very used to a visual context. When I walk around my town that I've lived in for 25 years, my brain just kind of fills in where I am, what the buildings look like, and when I find myself in a place I've never been, it's more like the Matrix, where it's just like a white, blank canvas. I'm just kind of walking in, and I don't really know what's around me. So when I get into those new situations and I'm with my wife, I'm like, what's around here? Oh, there's a big, apartment building to our right, and to the left it's open, and you can see the water off in the distance. Okay, now I'm picturing it. Now that white canvas is filled in some way that I wasn't able to glean from the sounds on my own. But again, for a person who's maybe been blind all their life, that visual is not something they would look for because they never had it to begin with. So I think it's probably why it was such a heated debate or talked about a lot, is because of the spectrum of blindness.
Yeah, and by that time, there's a lot of investment in this character. People wanted her to be something and to do certain things. So there were things, by the way, I did change. I removed too, things that were elements of those types of moments, the way she asked things, the way things were the way the relationship built. I can't remember offhand some of the things I avoided, but it was vetted heavily.
Yeah, I mean the game as well as we've been talking, as people have been hearing. I mean, you have, you're walking around, you have movement in that way, you have fighting scenes, you have quests that you undertake, conversations that you engage with, loot that you pick up, shops where you buy different gear. I mean, a lot of different components to make it a rich world and add complexity. And again, like a lot of blind people, oh, we've made this blind game for you, and it's super simple, and there's not really much engagement in it. I mean, this is a very rich and engaging game. And with all of those different components, did you find, one set a little bit more difficult to create accessibility around, or did it all kind of work out pretty smoothly for you? What was your experience about actually putting accessibility into the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most coaching I got was on the UI side of things, how to handle descriptions of how to interact with the game, keyboard controls versus what do you call it? Controller controls. That's where most of the real work happened, and I had a lot of consultation help with people who knew this stuff really well. And I think maybe the early on lessons I learned, I think I wanted a game that had a lot more fidelity with things being around you. And I realized the limits of that for just playability was probably the biggest one, that enemies only surround you from 3 slots. There's someone in front of you, to the right and to the left.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of allows somebody who doesn't hear binaural audio with the same detail to say, oh, that's clearly to my right. This is clear to my left. That's in front of me. I was thinking initially that I'd have these 45 degree, like 5 enemies could be around you, behind potentially, and those are the things I had to simplify because people just could not discern that.
Right.
But when it came to the complexity of listening for certain attacks and the complexity of what I might ask a player to do in choosing whether or not to block or to interrupt an attack, I found that over time was quite reasonable. And as long as I had a mode in the game where people pretty much didn't die and could hack away and win, I would carry forward people who were really looking for a narrative experience that had some the feeling of combat, but not really the challenge of combat.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the particular reason I wanted to speak with you about the Vale, Shadow of the Crown, was it has this component in it, and then I'm sure some of it is the narrative, some of it is the way the combat is designed, the obviously high quality and the voice acting, as well as the overall sound quality, is that it's fun. And that is a thing that is missing from a lot of games that are made accessible, but they're not necessarily fun. They're almost more frustrating. Yes, I can get through this. You've made it so I can get through this, but did I have fun doing it? And a lot of those games where accessibility is added on and not part of the game design from the beginning, or specifically designed around considering accessibility, it kind of misses out on the fun part. And this is what I really like about the Vale, is that it's a fun game. It's a great story. It's great engaging combat. It's fun, picking up loot and swapping out at the store, my gear, and deciding what kind of character I'm going to have, whether I'm going for speed or criticals or whatever the case may be. It's a fun game, and I don't know if that just, you created the game and it just naturally was fun, or again from feedback from the blind community beta testers that you had, they helped you create a fun game. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Did it just work out, or did you get a lot of feedback that helped you make it fun?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point was not accessibility. First of all, the starting point was an audio game that then brought as many of the things we expect in a game forward. And again, it was going to be no visual, so it was going to be accessible. I knew that had to be. Someone who is sighted or blind, didn't matter. You're going to have to be able to engage with this game. So, but the original idea was to pull away audio and then fill in all the things that you don't, or sorry, pull away visuals and then fill in the lack of visuals with other mechanics and things. And I found it actually did go relatively smoothly, where if everything has a sound some analogous to the visuals, how do you time the things that we're always used to, the timing of an attack. You can hear the nature of the attack by the sound I choose, and then you get some feedback to whether or not you're swinging or blocking at the right time. Like, those things seem relatively intuitive to me. Out of some fortunate things, out of necessity, I did not want to have massive shops with a lot of options. So I certainly wasn't going the Diablo route of
Right.
loot grinding,
Right.
and so. But then to me, this is my sensibilities in designing RPGs anyway. I want there to be a lot of meaning to the choices you make. I think we could do a better job, by the way, in the future. But the idea that when you choose a weapon, you're making an investment, and you choose it, once a major level, you're making a decision. Do I switch or do I get something else? Not picking up 17 things and then looking through and picking which. You're constantly flipping over your weapon. You'll buy a sword, you'll keep it almost the entire game and maybe switch it out at the end.
Right.
So added more value. And then the moments had more value because instead of interacting with this shopkeeper on the level of just hey, here are my wares, and then you're going through charts up and down, because I had to back it all with audio and I didn't want robot audio to come in or narration. He's going to tell you about the weapons. He's going to try to sell them to you. You're going to know a little bit about him.
Yeah.
So it becomes a conversation moment or a narrative moment in you just trying to choose between 4 items or 5 items in a shop. So paring it down was sort of needed, but at the same time, I think it added value to the moment. It gave it more, it's more special.
Yeah, I really liked that. When you're picking a sword, it's it'll say something like, "Oh, well, you can swing this faster than your old sword, and you can get better criticals, but the recovery time is longer." And it would kind of tell you that as a comparison. You didn't have to go and try to look at your old sword and go to a different menu. It's, as you're looking at this new thing you want to purchase, it's kind of giving you the comparison versus what you had, which I thought was a nice way to kind of do that and not get bogged down in menus and things like that.
Yeah.
As you've kind of created this game, it's a great accessible game. I mean, do you find yourself to be a gaming accessibility expert at this point? Do you know how to create accessible games? Is that a specialty skill set that you now have?
Not me. I can live in the world where accessibility is important. But I've met 2 people in particular that will be on my next projects because of this. There's a guy, Lukáš Hosnadl, in Czech Republic, who is a developer in his own right and an accessibility consultant, but also a great writer, great designer. Most of the contribution wasn't just accessibility; it was better design of a game in general stuff. And then Martin Koselis, who's here in Canada, he was came on early. Like these people in the community that I've met would be with me on this, and I'd be leaning on them heavily. I think I just am becoming a person that could rally them together, I guess, because I wouldn't go it alone. Let me just put it that way. As a consultant, certainly no.
If you had to give some advice to another developer who's working on a game about making it accessible, I mean, what would be your top piece of advice that you would give them?
A first thought is your game a good candidate for this? Is this a type of genre the community is looking for? Or what is the interest in the community? How easily does your game could it be accessible? A game that's narrative heavy with a lot of, if you're already going to invest in music and voiceover, let's say, for your game, to me, it's immediately a candidate for something that should be accessible. And then it's like, okay, if it's an open world game and there's a lot of work you'd have to do, like think of all the work they had to do for Last of Us Part 2, is there a version or a way that you can take your game and make it more accessible? Which may not be exactly the same experience, and then because I think anything is good. It's better than nothing. And then the final thing is there's going to be a group of games that are very easy, I think, to translate in the way we did anyway. And I think games like God of War is the newest one that's out there. But I think those are the ones that are the easiest to translate because of the relatively linear path and stuff. So I think it really comes down to your game to start with, and then reaching out to the community. Call me. I can put you in touch with some people that can help out.
Nice.
But yeah, I think that's the big thing. And it's one thing I will say is that the community is super engaged and super supportive, and also become evangelists for your game. So it's not just like, oh, I'm doing this to help a group of people. You're also doing it to help your game and your business. Like you just get a lot of support that does carry over into more articles, more people writing about your game. So I think there is a knock-on effect that does help the game, even if people don't know it's accessible. I think having that community help what do you call it, promote the game, I think is super helpful. So there's things for you to get back from that for sure.
The Vale seems like it could port to a mobile phone, an Android, an iPhone, that the mechanics are there to do that. Is that anything that you ever considered doing?
It was something I considered. I initially there was so much excitement about trying to get something on a console from within the community just to do it, sort of thing.
Sure.
And then there were a lot of people at the community, especially the people. I keep on saying Swamp. I hope people know what Swamp is. But it's a first person game, zombie game, competitive game as well, which is PC focused. So I knew that's where there was a group of people, and the forums I was all in were PC forums. So mobile was definitely a second thought, and because of the gesture based stuff, it would be quite a lot of work to bring it to mobile. More work than maybe people are aware of too, or I was aware of initially. So initially it was like, yeah, of course we're going to do that, and then it became an expense thing. So where I'm looking right now is to make a follow-up game that has visuals and is accessible, and may be a better fit for mobile, to be honest. But at this point, we don't have any plans to go to mobile. And frankly, it probably has more to do with it's the business of it. I think is the expense to get it to mobile would probably not pay back the investment in that time. So it's purely a business decision on that standpoint. But maybe there's an argument to be made that I should be bringing this to mobile, and I'd certainly consider that, especially if we had a better idea of exactly who this would mean something for. And then I'd have to look at how hard this would be to do. But it's the gesture-based stuff is what makes it tricky, I think.
Yeah, I figured, like, my thought was, you have one finger swipe could be you swinging your sword. If you did two finger swipe, that would be you blocking with your shield. Yep. So it seemed like it could work out. But again, I'm not a coder, so I don't know.
And somebody who has more experience in mobile games, I mean, we probably should talk after this, if because that is something I've thought about, but have not gone very far down that road. And my consultants weren't big mobile gamers either. So the path of the project very much took the path it did because of interest from Microsoft right out of the gate, and my consultants and the people that helped me build the game were on the forums talking about PC games. So I kind of followed the crowd down that path.
Yeah, I have loads of ideas with no coding understanding of what it takes. So take everything I say with a grain of salt.
Those are like my ideas. Same idea. No coding understanding.
You were mentioning, kind of the next step, next thing that you're going to work on, so maybe give people a little insight on that, and how far away do you think that'll be before whatever you're working on next comes out?
Yeah, I mean, these projects seem to be, actually all my projects take forever. I'm finishing up a project now, which is not accessible at this point. It's a project I started before the Vale, and it's a narrative-based sci-fi game, but it's got a lot of narrative in it, so it might be a candidate. Might be something we consider making accessible to the completely blind community. There's all sorts of things you do generally in best practice in terms of making it easier for someone who's low vision to play, but to be completely blind and play games is a lot of effort that usually has to go into setting up sound systems and stuff. But the one that I'm really looking forward to from a continuous in the Vale is the next project we're working on. We're trying to build it from the ground up to be an RPG where you get to choose your character. You can choose all sorts of different aspects of your character. It's something that will be accessible to the blind community as well as the deaf community, which the Vale was not, in being exclusively audio based. And we have sort of this dream that we can play. It's a cooperative RPG as well as the plan. And I'm really hoping it'll be a game that people from both blind and deaf communities can play together. Sort of this idea as well. And really just taking some of the mechanics that we thought worked in the Vale audio wise, just the novelty of having the lights go out all of a sudden when you're in a room, and now you've got to navigate, or characters you could choose potentially aspects of your RPG choice. Have you rely on sound more exclusively, and then for accessibility reasons, game elements of sighted interaction that your character might be enjoying. For someone who's blind, there would be an audio equivalent sound that would allow you to play the game, doing the things that character's doing. So that's our big hope. I don't know, 2-3 years, who knows? But we are starting on that.
And do you have is that something that's Microsoft backed as well that you're working on, or are you trying to find people to work with?
Not exactly yet. They definitely know about it. They definitely given us signals they're going to help us port it. But in terms of getting like real funding early on is something I'm working on, because it's quite I guess it's a lot of risk. Not I guess, but there's a lot of risk in doing that. But I really kind of I want to find a way to do it. I'm sure we'll get there. But yes, Microsoft's definitely a good partner. I think Sony's probably a pretty good partner too, considering they did Last of Us. I know the producers on their side were quite active in getting Last of Us Part 2 to be accessible. It wasn't just Naughty Dog; it was they were actively in it. So, and just the novelty, I guess, of doing this on a console. I think it has it's I think it's somewhat meaningful, even though there's not a lot of people buying consoles within the blind, low vision community. But it's the idea that
because there's not much there for us right now. But if there's
no, and really what it comes down to is families that own these systems, or friends or brothers,
right.
and all of a sudden you start slowly getting this idea that, oh, wait a minute, there's this, it's accessible. I'm still a little surprised that Last of Us Part 2. I talk about it. My consultants and I played it without any visuals on. I thought they did a great job, so I hold it fairly high esteem, I guess. But I'm a little maybe disappointed that there hasn't been at least 1 or 2 games a year that have come out since then, maybe 2 or 3 even, that have that full blind accessibility in a AAA title. And God of War, I think it's done it. I don't know how successful yet. I haven't played it, but the new God of War. But yeah, I'd like, that's what I'm kind of excited about, is that if you do have someone who has a console, you'll be playing this. You'll have 2 or 3 big games that you can lose yourself in a year, and that would start feeling a little bit more equitable.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me about the Vale Shadow of the Crown, available on the Xbox as well as console. And I really appreciate you working to make the game not just an auditory game, but an accessible game, and also really appreciate, as you're looking at your new projects, that you're thinking about accessibility as well. Again, as you kind of mentioned, the more games that become available, the more people might pick up a console, and you might have more blind people playing, which then will lead to more games for blind people on those systems. So I really appreciate the steps you've taken here at the beginning to put stuff out there for us to engage with. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.